The wrong woman to humiliate. The sun had just started rising over the airport runway, painting the glass windows in gold and amber as the crowd inside the terminal began to stir with quiet energy. Some dragging heavy bags, others clutching coffee. Cliff, while glancing up at the flight boards blinking above like digital stars, but none of it seemed to concern Veronica, who stood at the private check-in counter wearing a cream designer coat, oversized sunglasses, and an expression that suggested she was better than everyone else in the room. Her assistant trailed behind her nervously, tapping at the screen of her phone trying to confirm their itinerary, while Veronica snapped her fingers toward the check-in agent, who looked up with polite concern and a tired smile. Veronica didn't return the smile. Instead, she handed over her ID like it was something poisonous and said in a sharp voice, "I hope the champagne is cold this time. I had to suffer through warm sparkling wine the last time I flew with your airline, and it was frankly unacceptable." The agent nodded apologetically and replied, "Of course, ma'am, our crew is aware of your preferences and will ensure everything is to your satisfaction today." Veronica didn't thank her. She simply turned on her heel, signaling her assistant to keep up as they moved toward the security checkpoint, skipping lines. Escorted by a uniformed employee, the other passengers watched, some whispering quietly, some rolling their eyes, others just tired and too indifferent to react. Inside the plane, the crew was already preparing the cabin for the first-class boarding. Ava stood near the galley, organizing drinks and reviewing her flight notes. She was calm, focused, dressed immaculately. In her deep navy uniform with polished shoes, her curly hair tied neatly at the back, and a soft, neutral expression on her face. The other flight attendants spoke quietly behind her, occasionally joking or reviewing passenger names. Ava heard one of them say Veronica's name and glanced over, recognizing it immediately. Ava had seen that name before a handful of times. She was a known passenger, and more than that, a known problem. She was wealthy, powerful, and arrogant, and she often treated staff like objects or worse. Ava didn't say anything. She just folded a fresh blanket and placed it on the armrest of seat 1, AWHEN. Veronica finally boarded the plane. Her heels clacked against the flooring like a judge delivering verdicts, each step echoing authority and disdain. She paused at the entrance of the first-class cabin, looked around, and the moment her eyes landed on Ava, her lips curled into a dismissive smirk. She adjusted her sunglasses and turned slightly toward her assistant, who was struggling with a large carry-on behind her, whispering something under her breath, but loud enough for Ava to catch it. "Oh great, a stewardess like her, just what I needed today." Ava approached calmly. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome aboard. Would you like assistance with your luggage?" she asked gently. Veronica didn't look at her directly. She waved a hand dismissively and replied, "I'm quite sure. I didn't ask for help, darling. Besides, I don't trust just anyone with my belongings." Ava didn't react. She simply stepped aside, allowing her to pass. Veronica stopped at her seat, placed her bag roughly in the overhead compartment, and plopped into her seat with an exaggerated sigh, then immediately began inspecting the armrest, the window, the pillow, with exaggerated disapproval. Within minutes, the service bell above her seat began to ring. Ava approached once again. "Yes, ma'am." Veronica raised an eyebrow without looking up. "Orange juice, fresh squeezed, none of that boxed garbage, and make sure it's cold and in a proper glass, not those plastic cups like last time." Ava nodded. "Certainly, ma'am. Anything else?" Veronica leaned back slightly, not hiding her irritation, and added, "Yes, a blanket that doesn't smell like detergent, and a proper napkin, not paper." Ava turned and walked to the galley, her face composed, though her chest felt a little tight. This wasn't new, it wasn't rare. She'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but something about Veronica was different. It wasn't just arrogance, it was venom disguised as sophistication, a deliberate way of talking that felt like small knives hidden behind expensive perfume and makeup. Ava returned shortly after, with everything as requested. She placed the tray gently in front of Veronica and said, "Here you go, ma'am." Veronica didn't say thank you. She picked up the glass, inspected it, as if looking for fingerprints, and muttered, "Took you long enough." That other passengers in first class began to take notice. A man in a grey suit shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while a young woman behind Veronica watched with narrowed eyes. But no one said anything. Most people didn't want conflict in the confined space of a plane, and Veronica knew that she thrived on it. She liked knowing no one would stand up. She liked the silence that followed her cruelty. Midway through the flight, Ava checked on the other passengers, offering refills and meals, smiling professionally, though her heart wasn't quite in it anymore. She returned to Veronica's row and asked politely, "Would you care for lunch today, ma'am?" Veronica looked her up and down and replied, "Only if it doesn't taste like plastic. Do you know how much I paid for this seat?" Ava smiled softly. "I understand, ma'am. We have roasted chicken or grilled salmon today, both served with your choice of sides." Veronica huffed. "Do I look like someone who eats airplane chicken? Bring me the salmon and don't ruin it." Ava nodded and turned again. The woman across the aisle caught Ava's eye and gave her a small, sympathetic nod. The hours passed slowly, and the tension thickened. Veronica continued her subtle jabs and icy complaints. Even when Ava delivered her perfectly prepared salmon, she made a point to grimace and say, "I could have had better at a hospital cafeteria." Ava didn't flinch, but she felt something shift inside, something she couldn't explain, a pressure building, like someone lighting match after match and waiting for the flame to catch. Just before landing, Veronica did the unthinkable. She stood up as the plane descended and walked toward the galley she found. Ava, organizing trays and cleaning up. Veronica's voice cut through the space like a knife. "I'm reporting you the moment we land," she snapped, her voice sharp and cold. "You were rude, inattentive and slow. I have friends in the executive office, and I'll make sure they hear about how you embarrassed me today." Ava didn't respond at first. She looked up, her eyes steady, her voice calm. "I'm sorry you feel that way, ma'am. I did everything I could to serve you properly." Veronica stepped closer, her voice low. "I don't want an apology. I want consequences. You'll learn not to cross someone like me." Ava didn't move, but her hands were now gripping the edge of the metal counter. Suddenly a deep voice spoke from behind them. "Is that so?" Both women turned. Veronica's face went pale. Standing there was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a fitted navy blue suit with silver hair and a quiet confidence that silenced the air around him. The pilots had just opened the cockpit door, and crew members stood alert. The passengers in the front rows leaned to see what was happening. Veronica narrowed her eyes at the man and snapped, "Who are you supposed to be?" He stepped forward, slowly pulled out a sleek black wallet and flipped it open, revealing a card with the airline's gold emblem and a line of embossed letters. Veronica's mouth began to move, but no words came. "I'm the owner of this airline," he said evenly, "and I've been on this flight watching everything." Ripple of shock moved through the front cabin. One passenger gasped, another covered their mouth with their hand. The man continued, "And you, ma'am, have done something I've rarely seen with such clarity. You humiliated and harassed one of our finest crew members. Ava here has worked with us for nearly a decade and has earned more awards and recognitions than anyone on this staff." Veronica opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. The owner walked over to Ava and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Ava gave a small nod, though her lips trembled slightly. Then he turned to Veronica. "You will be escorted off this plane upon landing and permanently blacklisted from flying with our airline again." A chorus of whispers swept through the cabin. Someone clapped once, another joined, and before long there was a small but firm round of applause that followed. Veronica, as she slowly backed away, face pale eyes widened. Ava, for the first time that day, smiled, not because of revenge, but because someone finally stood up for what was right. In that moment, the balance of power shifted, not through anger, not through rage, but through truth, respect, and quiet courage. The apology that never came. When the plane touched down, the wheels humming across the tarmac and the brakes sighing gently through the fuselage, the cabin lights brightened to signal arrival, and passengers began to gather their belongings. But unlike every other landing, this one carried a strange weight, as if the air itself had been thickened by all that had just occurred. Ava stood by the galley with her hands lightly clasped in front of her, her uniform still pristine, her hair still tucked perfectly behind her ears, but her eyes spoke of something heavier, something that could not be easily folded away. Like the safety cards tucked in each seat pocket, Veronica remained seated, eyes forward, lips tight, as if trying to rehearse a version of events where she still held the power, where she still held dignity, where her status still meant something. But that illusion had cracked, and the truth of her own actions had been exposed. Like a wound she could no longer bandage with money or pred. The airline owner stood at the front of the cabin, exchanging quiet nods with passengers who recognized him but said nothing instead, choosing to exit the aircraft with a sort of respectful silence that had replaced all previous tension. The man's expression was unreadable, but his eyes stayed locked on Veronica until she stood slowly, her posture stiff, her breathing titiva. turned just slightly, catching a glimpse of Veronica stepping into the aisle, and the owner signaled to a waiting staff member, a tall man in a dark uniform, who entered from the jet bridge with a clipboard in hand. Miss Veronica, please come with me, the man said, his voice low and professional. Veronica's eyebrows twitched slightly, as if preparing to protest, but her words caught in her throat. There were no cameras here, no followers, no reporters to frame the moment for her narrative. There was only the truth and the bitter weight of consequence. The other passengers watched in silence as Veronica exited the plane, her heels no longer clacking with authority, but moving with forced calm like someone walking across fragile ice. Eva remained by the galley until the last passenger stepped off. Then she walked toward the exit, her legs suddenly feeling heavy, her steps slower than usual. The owner of the airline turned to her with a respectful nod and said, "Thank you for remaining professional, Eva. I'll be personally reviewing what happened and speaking to corporate about what needs to change." Eva nodded gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've had worse," she said, not to diminish the moment, but as a reflection of how common this experience was for her. That night Eva returned to her apartment, a modest two-bedroom tucked in a quiet part of the city. She kicked off her shoes, set her bag down and sank into the couch, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She thought of Veronica's eyes filled with cold fire and entitlement, thought of the passengers, some silent, some sympathetic, all watching. She poured herself a glass of water and stared out the window, the city lights blinking softly below like tired stars, and for the first time in a long time she allowed herself to cry, not because she was broken, but because she had spent so long holding it all in, and now it had finally overflowed. The next morning Eva received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was brief and signed with only initials, but the words left her stunned. "We saw everything, and we are sorry, we need to talk." She read it 3 times, unsure of what to believe, and then her phone buzzed again. This time it was from her airline's corporate office, requesting her presence in a meeting that afternoon. No explanation, just a request. When she arrived at the headquarters, she was escorted to a high-floor conference room where the airline owner waited, alongside 2 executives and 1 woman Eva didn't recognize, but who stood up immediately when she entered. "Eva, thank you for coming," said the owner, gesturing to the seat across from him. Eva sat, her hands resting in her lap, heart beating steadily beneath her blouse. "Is Janice," he said. "She's with our legal team. She's also been handling customer conduct investigations for our board, and after last night, she pushed for a full review of how our staff, especially women of color, have been treated by certain high-profile passengers." Eva blinked slowly, the words settling over her like slow-falling snow. "We want to formally apologize," Janice added, her voice firm but warm, "and we want to offer you more than just words." The executive beside her slid a folder across the table. Eva opened it, and her eyes widened. Inside was a letter of formal apology from the company, a record of suspension for Veronica's passenger privileges, and an invitation to be part of a new internal council focused on equality, safety, and protection for crew members. Eva looked up, her voice steady but unsure. "Why, maybe cause you endured with grace," said the owner, "and because we need people who understand, not just from a rule book, but from life." Eva left the meeting that day, not with revenge, not with triumph, but with something far more valuable. She left with a voice, with recognition, and with a platform that would allow her to help protect others who might have suffered in silence. But just as her world began to shift, something unexpected happened. Days later, in the form of a news article, a story broke across several outlets that Veronica James, a powerful investor and public figure, had been denied service by a major airline due to misconduct. The story remained vague, protecting identities, but speculation swirled. Then something stranger occurred. Eva received another message, this one anonymous and sent to her work email. It said, "I was in that cabin. I saw what happened. You didn't just hold your ground. You reminded us what dignity looks like. Thank you, Anne." With it was a photo taken from across the aisle, clearly snapped during the moment Veronica confronted Eva in the galley. It showed Eva standing with her back straight, eyes forward, and Veronica's angry face inches away. Eva stared at the image for a long time, not because she wanted to remember the confrontation, but because she saw something else in that image, something that she hadn't noticed in the moment. There was a man seated behind Veronica, half obscured by her figure, his eyes not on Eva but on Veronica, and his expression was not one of surprise or discomfort. It was something else. Recognition. It haunted Eva for days. Yes, tried to brush it off, but the feeling stayed, and every time she remembered that moment something deeper stirred. Veronica had claimed to know someone at the top, but Ava now wondered if the story was even bigger than she'd imagined, because what if Veronica hadn't just been cruel out of habit? What if she had something to hide? What if the owner of the airline hadn't just acted to protect Ava? What if he had his own reasons for watching her so closely? Ava didn't know it yet, but the flight had ended, the story hadn't, and the truth was only just boarding the hidden passenger. Ava sat quietly at her kitchen table with her fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of tea that had already gone cold, her eyes fixed on the photo that had arrived 2 nights ago, her mind circling the face of the man behind Veronica, half hidden in the aisle shadows, his jaw stiff, his eyes locked, not on Ava but on Veronica, and something about the way he looked at her made Ava feel like he knew her, not in a general public kind of way, but deeply personally, like someone who had watched her fall and now couldn't believe she'd been caught again. The photo wouldn't let go of her thoughts, and the message that came with it was unsigned, with no return address and no contact to thank you from someone who saw what she endured and sent this quiet image as proof. But the message didn't end with gratitude. It left a gap, a missing piece, a question Ava couldn't stop asking. Who was the man in the picture, and why was he staring at Veronica like he had been waiting for years to see her slip? Ava zoomed in on his face again, her phone screen bright in the darkness of the apartment, and she noticed something she hadn't before, a small pin on his jacket, barely visible just below his collar, and she recognized the emblem. It was the same emblem worn by internal investigators assigned to special flight safety protocols, but these investigators never flew with commercial passengers. They moved in secret. They were part of a quiet division, used only when high-risk travelers boarded. Ava had heard whispers of such people in training, rarely seen, never confirmed. Her phone buzzed again, and she jumped. It was a new message from the airline headquarters, but this time it wasn't about her. It was a notice, a soft internal warning that a handful of recent flights involving high-profile individuals were being reviewed for passenger conduct patterns and security concerns. She blinked slowly, realizing that her confrontation with Veronica may not have been a standalone event, but the final straw in a much larger story. Her instincts told her to stay out of it, let it pass, focus on her new advisory role, and forget about the photo, but her heart said otherwise. Next day she returned to the airline's offices, under the pretext of reviewing new safety procedures, but her real goal was simpler. She wanted access to the passenger manifest from that flight, not the public list, but the full internal log that included non-ticketed operatives. She knew it was classified, and she knew asking directly could raise red flags, so instead she met with the only person who might understand. His name was Malcolm, a systems analyst who had been with the airline for over a decade and who once fixed Ava's tablet during a layover when no one else could. She found him in the break room reading an old paperback mystery novel and sipping strong coffee. She slid into the seat beside him and offered a quiet smile. "To ask you something confidential," she said softly, and Malcolm looked up with one brow raised but didn't speak. Instead he waited. She pulled out her phone, turned the screen to him, and showed the photo. His eyes scanned the image slowly, then returned to hers. "You want to know who he is, don't you?" Ava nodded. Malcolm glanced around the room, then leaned in close and whispered, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but I know exactly who he is. He's not just an investigator. He's internal affairs contracted through federal compliance. His name is Eli Prescott, and he doesn't just watch passengers. He tracks financial crime, fraud, human trafficking, and elite-level corruption." Felt her stomach twist. Why would he be on a random commercial flight, unless he was watching Veronica? Malcolm continued in a lower voice, "It's Veronica. James has been on a watch list for over a year. She's been flagged for multiple international flights involving high-volume cash transfers and unusual associations. That flight you were on wasn't just any flight. It was a monitored route, and she didn't know she was being watched until she snapped, until you stood your ground and unknowingly triggered an exposure." Ava sat back slowly, her heartbeat thudding against her ribs. This time she thought she was just enduring another entitled passenger, but in reality she had become part of something larger, something she never signed up for. She stood and thanked Malcolm quietly, and the way home her thoughts spiraled. If Veronica was under surveillance, and if Eli Prescott was there watching her, then the confrontation wasn't just witnessed, it was recorded, possibly used, a piece of a puzzle far beyond customer complaints and suspended privileges. That evening, as she sat in silence, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a message. The number was unlisted. Ava hesitated, then answered. A calm male voice spoke. Miss Ava, this is Eli Prescott. I believe we need to talk. Her hand tightened around the phone. Yes, I believe we do, he continued. I understand you've received an image of me from the flight, and I'd like to clarify a few things before rumors grow. Legsai was on that flight for a reason, and you weren't supposed to be involved, but things changed. You didn't just hold your ground against a difficult passenger, you forced a mask to slip, one that's been protecting a very powerful and very dangerous network. Kiva tried to speak, but her throat caught. Eli continued. I know this is a lot, and I know you're not an agent, but you were in the right place at the right time. Man now may need your help because Veronica's story isn't over, and you may be the only one she didn't expect to rise above her. Ava swallowed hard. What exactly do you need from me? Eli paused before replying. I need you to meet me tomorrow in person. No phones, no recordings. There's something you need to see, and if you agree, it could change everything. Ava closed her eyes. She had survived a storm of humiliation in public, held her dignity while being torn down by status, and now she stood at the edge of something darker, something deeper, the kind of story no one sees until it breaks through the surface, and now it had chosen her. What she saw behind the curtain. Ava stood on the corner of a quiet downtown block, dressed in plain clothes with a scarf pulled lightly around her neck, the breeze whispering past tall windows as the city went about its usual morning rhythms, unaware that just one floor above, an entirely different kind of conversation was about to begin. She looked up at the small brass sign outside the building. No company name, no flashy logo, just a number and a keypad next to a reinforced glass door. She hesitated, then entered the access code Eli had given her over the phone. The elevator was small and old, the kind with a slow rise and a faint hum that made the silence feel heavier. By the time she reached the 4th floor, her heart was beating like a low drum inside her ribs. The doors opened to a narrow hallway, and Eli stood at the far end, dressed in a grey blazer, jeans, and a black turtleneck. His expression was calm but focused, like someone who had long since stopped believing in coincidence. Thank you for coming, he said with a slight nod, and gestured for her to follow. They entered a soundproof room with no windows to chairs, and a single table with a laptop on it. A folder thick with documents sat beside it. Tiva sat slowly, her eyes not leaving his. You said you had something to show. Eli nodded and opened the laptop, typing in a code that revealed several tabs and images, some of which looked like financial records, while others were flight logs and surveillance screenshots. He began speaking carefully, as if each word mattered more than the last. Veronica, James isn't just a wealthy passenger with a bad attitude, one of several silent investors who own indirect shares in global charter companies, and we believe she's been moving assets and people under the radar for years. Her behavior on your flight wasn't about power or ego, it was panic. We think she recognized me halfway through the flight and tried to distract her, redirect to create a scene loud enough to draw attention away from her own actions. Ver leaned in slowly. Why tell me all this? Because you're the reason she lost control. You forced her hand, and doing so you gave us the first real crack in her armory. Lai turned the screen to show a time-stamped video from the flight. It showed Veronica whispering to someone who never appeared in the passenger manifest, man seated behind her who passed her a small envelope during drink service. The camera zoomed in digitally on the envelope. Ava blinked. That's not airline paper. No. Eli said it's not. That envelope was tracked to a shell company in Zurich. 2 days later, funds were moved, a plane was chartered under false names, and someone vanished. Ava's mouth went dry. So what now? Eli clicked again and showed her something else. A picture of Ava taken just after the flight. She was stepping off the aircraft, looking calm on the outside, but the caption written below chilled her. Potential liability. Lai explained softly. Someone on Veronica's end marked you as a threat, and that means you're now part of the story, whether you want to be or not to. Via been watched since the day after the flight to your apartment was flagged, your phone monitored. She wants to know if you're going to stay silent. Speak of a sat frozen. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, and in that moment she understood this wasn't about one flight, one insult, one was about exposure and the people who would do anything to keep their secrets. Barry Dealey leaned forward. But here's what she doesn't understand. You're not just anyone. You respected within this airline. You have the trust of the crew, and now you have the attention of people who can protect you, but only if you're willing to step into the light. Tiva looked down at her hands, then looked back up. What exactly do you need from me? Eli opened the folder and pulled out a document. It was a witness briefing. You'll testify privately, not in court, not in public, but to a task force that's building a case. They need someone who saw her behavior firsthand, someone who wasn't part of the machine, someone real. Ava didn't answer right away. She thought of the years she spent flying across oceans and continents, smiling through pain, carrying trays while hiding wounds. She thought of the passengers who never saw her as human, and the ones who did. She thought of the way Veronica looked at her like she was furniture, and the way the passengers applauded when the truth came out. She thought of every flight she worked to prove her worth, and how in one moment she had proven so much more. She took the pen from Eli and signed. Later that evening, she walked home feeling like she was walking through fog. The city lights blinked like nervous eyes, and for the first time in years, Ava felt like she was being followed, not by footsteps or shadows, but by something older than fear. Truth does not stay quiet for long. The next morning, an unmarked car waited outside her apartment, with tinted windows and a man in a clean suit behind the wheel. No badge, no words, just a nod. She stepped in and was driven to an undisclosed location where the task force waited in a room filled with files, maps and timelines, all tracing paths that led to Veronica and beyond. She told them everything, every word, every insult, every movement on that flight, and when she was done, the lead officer stood and said, "You've just given us the piece we were missing. Veronica's world is about to change." Ava left the building feeling something inside her shift, not fear but clarity. She was never supposed to be part of any of this, but now that she was, she would no longer be silent, because sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a uniform and walks calmly through the fire. The fall of Veronica James. A morning sun filtered through the blinds of Ava's apartment, casting long golden bars of light across the floor. But her heart was already awake and racing. She had barely slept, her mind turning over and over the things she had learned, the people she had spoken to, the dark network hiding behind perfect smiles and luxury power. Her hands trembled as she zipped up her coat, knowing that today something would happen, something irreversible. She stepped outside and saw the same unmarked car from the previous day, idling silently. The driver opened the door without a word, and she slid in, her thoughts jumping ahead to the meeting where Eli had said the final piece would come together, where the curtain would be lifted and Veronica James would be exposed. They arrived at a different building, this one tucked away between warehouses in a forgotten industrial zone, its brick walls weathered and gray. Ava followed Eli inside, past thick doors and into a dim room where men and women in formal dress sat around a long metal table, screens lit up behind them, each showing documents, satellite photos, wire transfer, receipts and communication logs. Ava saw her name on one folder, her face on one screen, but what caught her breath was the one image at the center of the wallet. Was Veronica James being led through an airport corridor, surrounded by two federal agents, her face no longer composed or regal, now strained, panicked, her scarf pulled tightly over her head to avoid the cameras. Eli stood at the front of the room and addressed the table. Of 0600 hours, Veronica James has been taken into federal custody. She was intercepted trying to board a private jet scheduled for Zurich under an alias. Her documents were forged, her luggage was packed with encrypted tech, and she had nearly 200,000 in undeclared currency. The room stayed quiet as the information sank, and he continued, "She is being held without bail due to risk of flight, and we now have enough evidence to open formal proceedings against her and her associates across 3 countries. Eva's mouth parted slightly, and her breath caught. This was not just justice, it was revelation. Then Eli turned toward her and said, "But this never would have happened without Ava Mitchell." Every person in the room turned to her and began to nod slowly, one by one, not out of formality but out of recognition. Because they had seen what she had endured. They had seen her remain calm when others would have screamed or walked away. They had seen her hold herself together long enough for a hidden machine to catch a dangerous woman hiding in plain sight. Woman who once looked at Ava like she was beneath her, now exposed by the very person she tried to break. After the meeting, Eli walked Ava outside and handed her a sealed envelope. It was heavier than she expected. Inside were 2 things. First, a formal letter of commendation from the federal board thanking her for her courage, her clarity, and her role in dismantling an active criminal network. Second, a ticket first class, but not for a flight she would work, for a trip she would take, all expenses paid, wherever she wanted to go. Vaya looked at him with confusion. "I don't understand, Dealey. Smilidou've been flying for others your whole life. It's time you flew for yourself. She stared at the ticket for a long time, unsure if she should laugh or cry, her throat tightening with emotion. It wasn't just a reward, it was a reminder that she mattered, that her patience had purpose, that her voice had power. For the first time in years she felt free that evening. As the story broke across every major news outlet, people began to talk, some in disbelief, some in outrage, some in celebration of a woman whose name they didn't even know until now. But Ava didn't watch the news. She stood on her balcony with her suitcase by her side, ready to leave the city behind. For a while she had chosen a place far from airports, far from uniforms, far from glassy-eyed passengers and scheduled turbulence. Chose silence, peace, a garden, not an aisle. But before she left, she received one final message, this time not from Eli or corporate or an anonymous passenger. It was from someone unexpected. Dear Arviano, I don't deserve your time, but I had to write this from a place deeper than apology, from a place of truth. I was angry that day, not at you, at myself, because I was already drowning, and you were the mirror that showed May wasn't untouchable, and I think that terrified me more than anything. I lost everything, my influence, my allies, my name, but maybe that was what I needed. Maybe this is the beginning of my real life. You changed something in me, not because you were loud, but because you were tanned. You didn't fight me with rage, you fought me with grace. I will remember that until the end. Veronica Hiver read it 3 times, folded it, and placed it inside her coat pocket. She didn't forgive, not yet, but she understood, and sometimes that was enough. She stepped into the car that would take her to the airport, not as staff but as someone who finally chose herself the flight. She deserved. The ocean stretched wide beneath her as Ava leaned against the warm wooden balcony of her private villa, the waves whispering against the shore like a soft memory. The sun just beginning to dip into the water, painting the sky in colors so rich and golden it made her feel like she was inside a living dream. She had arrived just 2 days ago, but already the weight in her chest, the constant pressure to smile, to be composed, to walk with dignity, even while being disrespected, was slowly loosening its grip, like she had taken off a uniform that was stitched into her skin for years, and finally laid it down, not with bitterness but with peace. She sipped fresh juice from a cold glass and closed her eyes, letting the wind touch her cheeks. Not a stewardess, not a witness, not a fighter, just Ava, just a woman who survived something invisible and walked away with something no one could take back. Worth. Later that evening she sat by the beach with her feet in the cool sand and her phone in her lap, scrolling through a stream of messages that had flooded her inbox since the story broke around the world. Flight attendants from all corners of the globe had reached out, thanking her for standing tall, passengers writing in to say they had never realized how much pain hid behind the professional smiles of airline staff, mothers sending her photos of their daughters, calling her brave, calling her strengths, calling her an example. But it wasn't the fame that moved Ava, it was the echo, the quiet ripple she had created, not by fighting back but by staying true to herself, even when someone tried to erase her humanity. Knock at the small villa door pulled her from the moment, and she stood to open it, surprised to see a delivery person holding a small leather envelope marked confidential. She signed for it and brought it inside, opening it slowly with careful hands. Inside was a short letter and a key. A letter read: of R. Mitchell, for your courage, we would like to offer you something permanent. Your strength did not just change one flight, it changed the culture, and with that, we hope you accept this. A new beginning. Below the note was the emblem of the airline. Under it was her name, followed by her new title: Director of In-Flight Culture and Crew Advocacy. Laughed, then covered her mouth, not in disbelief but in joy, the kind of laugh that rises up from a place so deep even sadness cannot follow it. She held the key tightly in her hand, knowing it opened her new office in the corporate headquarters. Back home, not because she asked for it, but because she earned it. Every step, every insult, every calm breath under pressure had brought her here. She stood at the shoreline that night, watching the stars arrive one by one, and whispered a quiet thank you to the sky that had watched her for so long from the windows of 1,000 flights, to the sky that had seen her pain and finally witnessed her rise. And somewhere far away in a holding cell behind glass and silence, Veronica James sat with her own thoughts, the paper in her hands worn from being folded too many times, her eyes fixed on the signature at the bottom of the letter she had written. Eva Mitchell, the woman she once tried to humiliate, the woman who changed everything without ever needing to raise her voice. Yeva boarded her return flight 2 weeks later, but not in uniform. Not pushing a cart, not serving drinks. She stepped onto the aircraft wearing a simple white blouse, jeans and the softest smile. The crew who welcomed her did not know who she was, but she greeted them with warmth, helped a nervous child find their seat, smiled at the elderly man fumbling with his overhead bag, and when she took her place by the window, she looked out at the tarmac and then at the clouds that would soon carry her not to Svert, to Sorbia, because this time the flight was Story was Herstar and so was the Skythar end.